What question is a good question?
How can I be well positioned in the lives of non-believers for when those moments happen?
I believe in God. Why would you say I'm a non-believer?
Now that makes the conversation pretty serious pretty quickly. Those kind of critical junctures in someone's life where they realize, all right, I'm not picking what sweater to wear today. There's a lot on the line here.
That's a great explanation. Thank you.
Sometimes we have to be intentional about moving the conversation beyond just, hey, how about the weather?
How do you make the turn to something a little deeper? This week on the Reach Podcast. All right, hey, we are back. It is another episode of the Reach Podcast, and I've got with me today my friend Matt Burkett. Matt is our area director with Search Ministries out in Greensboro, North Carolina.
That's right.
Married to Leah. They got a couple little kids running around. Anyway, Matt, thank you so much for being here.
She perpetually deserves a shout out, Blaine, as you know. So much she tolerates on the home front. Yeah.
Well, that is true. So, but that's not why we're here. We're here to talk about another conversation. That's what we do on the Reach Podcast, and help people see how they can have these kind of conversations about Jesus with their friends. So why don't you set up the conversation we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, you know, I love the opportunity to kind of share the type of things that we do as staff folks at Search, because what becomes abundantly clear is that anybody can do this. And I'll share a story about a friend of mine named Peter. Peter's kind of a unique guy in the sense that he was really prompted to begin to look at the big questions in life because he was about to become a dad. And, you know, there's oftentimes kind of key moments like that where folks who maybe aren't churched or don't have a network of really close friends are really looking for somebody who's willing to invest in them and be, whether it's just a sounding board or if they genuinely are seeking kind of those really core beliefs and understandings that kind of make life work. And that's kind of where Peter was. Yeah.
And so where were you guys meeting when this conversation happened?
Yeah. So, you know, we had a few lunches, and, you know, I always try to find out, you know, when God seems to open up a door to have a relationship with somebody new, I want to know what interests them, kind of, you know, really get to know who they are and try and find ways for us to connect doing things they already enjoy doing. A pretty safe bet is lunch, though. Most people like lunch.
Everybody's got to eat.
Everybody's got to eat. So this particular conversation happened around a lunch.
And where does a guy like Matt Burkett go to lunch in Greensboro?
There are countless options. We do have the Search Cafeteria, which is a little place called Core Life, really almost directly across the street, where you can find myself and other kind of folks pretty often. But this particular lunch actually happened at a not so typical haunt because we were in High Point, a little community outside of Greensboro, where he lives and where my kids go to school, and just a regular other lunch spot. But had kind of a quiet area, which I always look for when I meet with somebody. I don't want to go to the place that's the biggest buzz or the most noise in town, because you want to be able to listen well, and if the door opens, to sensitively answer questions and not have interruption. So,
yeah. So you guys are talking. You chit-chatting, pleasantries, all that kind of stuff. How do you make the turn to something a little deeper?
You know, sometimes we have to be intentional about moving the conversation beyond just, hey, how about the weather, sports, and or even those cliches, and kind of move down that tier. But oftentimes I've found that just God either opens a door or the person I'm meeting with will ask something. And this was one of those occasions where we've become friends over the last 9 months. And he said, I got to ask you something. Why do you like me? I said, Peter, what do you mean?
What a question.
Yeah. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you know, you believe something entirely different than what I believe. We don't really have a ton of shared interests, hobbies, life experience. I'm just curious why you like me, why you always want to hang out, why you text me to go grab lunch.
That's a pretty direct question.
Yeah.
So what did you say?
Yeah, and it kind of caught me off guard, and I think it's partly because maybe his experience in the past is if someone doesn't believe what I believe, they don't really seem to be willing to spend time with me. I'm not exactly sure. I'm sure in the days ahead we'll unpack more of that. But in that moment, what I ended up saying was, well, Peter, I like you. And then I added something else that I wasn't really expecting to say at the time. And I don't know if we call this an assist from the Holy Spirit. I don't know what we call it. But I said, and Peter, also, I kind of think I can see God at work in your life. And that takes, now that makes the conversation pretty serious pretty quickly. And that, that was kind of his genuine interest in why somebody who was different than him would want to spend time with him, kind of took it to a more spiritual conversation.
Had you been talking about anything spiritually that kind of would allow you to say that, or did you just say it?
No, we've been, he's come forth with several kind of questions, and almost like usually when we have a lunch, we'll pick a topic. It's something that he usually picks. And so we've covered some pretty heavy, I guess what you would call apologetics type questions, but we actually not intentionally didn't have a subject line or question lined out and just say, well, let's just catch up.
And so when you threw that line out there, how did he respond?
It kind of took him aback, but not in a bad way. I mean, at this point, I think we've known each other long enough, and I've kind of earned the right as his friend to speak pretty plainly with him. He smiled when I said it, which I thought was a great response. And I'm not one to allow for the awkward silence. So about 3 or 4 seconds after that period, I said, I guess what I mean, Peter, is that I think that the reason that we get together, the reason that these questions are becoming important to you is because I think God in some way is trying to be a catalyst for you to begin really looking for him in earnest. And he said, well, yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. He didn't necessarily agree with me in that moment. And that's not really kind of where we're at in the friendship yet. I'm not looking to move the ball down the field or have some other agenda. What I'm ultimately hoping that he perceives through our relationship at this point is, here's somebody who wants to spend time with me. And to his question, on some level, I'm not really sure why, but I know pretty clearly what he believes, and the way he treats me is backing that up. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what does he believe? What have you learned about him through all these conversations?
So he grew up Catholic, and actually said he was about to finish, I guess, the process of catechism. And about 2 weeks before that, backed out and said, if I did this would be hypocritical. So one of his first questions was all right, if Jesus is all this and that, and then why are there so many bad Christians out there? I said, yeah, I get it. That's one I've heard before. But where he's at right now is he's really agnostic. He genuinely doesn't know. I think he has a desire to find something that helps him make sense of life, but also, he's about to become a dad, and he wants to have something beyond just, here's how you throw a baseball. Here's how you, and I think that kind of critical juncture in his life is really what's prompted our connection in the first place, and really why he seems eager to have some of these more deep and meaningful conversations.
Yeah, I mean, and do you find that that's a pretty common thing, that when there's these major life events, people are more open to wanting to talk about spiritual things?
Yeah, 100%. Whether it's, trying to find out, they get burnt out on career, whether they're, I've had the pleasure of helping some folks who were getting married, or, those kind of critical junctures in someone's life where they realize, all right, I'm not picking, picking what sweater to wear today. There's a lot on the line here. I think God kind of naturally has implanted us when those big moments arrive. There's like a little bell or something that goes off for a lot of folks. And my goal, and I think something that is Christians and folks who want to follow Jesus well and help reach people who've not come to know Christ yet, is how can I be well positioned in the lives of non-believers for when those moments happen? How do I become somebody who they trust, and who gets a phone call from somebody because, you've just kind of earned that right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what you want to do, man. I mean, that's where I think we all want to be. And sometimes it takes a while you just
Sure.
have your friends, you're hanging out, and it's not until something happens, or good or bad, but a kind of a life event happens that you get that call of, hey, can we talk about something a little more? Hey, everybody, I wanted to take a moment and let you know that the Reach podcast is brought to you by Search, a ministry dedicated to sharing Jesus through friendships and conversations for nearly 50 years. Learn more or get involved at searchnational.org. All right, so we're back to the restaurant.
Yep.
You throw out your response, think God might have me here, for a reason with you, some version of that. You guys kind of talk back and forth. Do you go any deeper that day?
Yeah. So I kind of sometimes like in those moments, and again, an MO for me when I know I'm going to meet with somebody and there's the potential that spiritual conversations are going to happen. And I always do my best to remember before I get out of the truck, make my way to the restaurant, be prayed up, right? Ask God, would I recognize if you're opening a door, I want to recognize it. The last thing I want to do is kick a door down and break it off its hinges, but help me to be perceptive of kind of where my friend's heart is and what might be accomplished today. Even if the only thing that's accomplished today is another time I got to spend with Peter where he knows that I have somebody in my life who cares about me.
Yeah.
But as that conversation continued, we dance kind of in and out of the spiritual water, so to speak. So, I used to be in sales, as you know, Blaine, and you would sometimes come up with something in a sales meeting where you'd give them something dramatic or significant, and then you'd kind of dance out of it just for a moment so they didn't feel like it was overwhelming. And so I think the conversation for a little bit went back to, by the way, our next checkup is this date, and in fact, he invited Leah and I to a shower, and like, oh, that's great, thank you guys. But before we left, I said, hey, Peter, can we revisit this just for 1 second? And I really hope I didn't say anything that upset you, but as we've continued our conversation, I think I may have found a better way to express what I meant. And so we did kind of dive back into a spiritual element. And
what'd you say?
And so I just shared with him, I think you're doing the right things right now. If I'm coming from a perspective where I've got some goal for them that's not where they are, that can really kind of muddy the waters of the relationship and in the long run kind of cost you something. Fortunately, God has a hand in all of this, and we're not ever at work alone. But the way that lunch ended is I said, Peter, I really want you to know that I'm greatly encouraged that these questions and the kind of conversations that we're having about faith are growing in importance for you. I'm excited for that. And I kind of promised him, if I ever come off too strong or overbearing, just know it's because I genuinely believe this and it's that meaningful in my life. And you can tell me to tone it down a little bit and like back off. But I'm excited for you because I think what you're undertaking right now is going to position you for so much more than just being a good father, for so much more than giving you good answers to the questions that you've had and that you've wrestled with for years, but that it's actually going to make all the difference in the world for you and hopefully your entire family in this life and for eternity. And again, I always like to stress with folks, and when I left with Peter, we did the bro hug and all that. We're walking out, but
but that's everybody you meet with.
I do. I'm a hugger, but my main point to him as we left, and I always try to schedule the next time when I'm with him. I think that's always a good move, or at least, hey, later today or later this week, I'll shoot you some dates for the next time we can get together. A little tip there, but the kind of the last words I left him with again were that kind of positive reinforcement that I'm so excited that this has become important to you, and I just feel grateful that I get to be someone who you trust with while you're seeking these answers, and just kind of gave him a hug and said, I'll text you later today.
Sounds like a great lunch, man. Great conversation, and you handled it just fantastic. It's a great picture of what this looks like in real life, which is it's a little messy.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's not open, close, shut, figured out. It's just another lunch, part of the journey, part of the process. And again, like you said, anybody can do this, which is really what we're trying to get at here at Reach. I want to take a little sidebar with you.
Yeah.
Okay, if that's all right, if you'll indulge me. But a couple times you use the word non-believer, which we use. We talk,
Sure.
There's other things we say, but I'm curious how you think about that. Like, what do you mean when you use that? And how would that help people when they're looking at their friends? Because I'll give you a little insight as what I'm looking at here. Because there's, I know from friends of mine, let's say, I would say they're not believers. They would say, I'm kind of offended if they were to know that. They'd go, I believe in God. Why would you say I'm a non-believer?
Yeah.
So, and especially when people are thinking of who in my life do I need to be investing in, who in my life doesn't know Jesus, when we think of that word non-believer, what are we really meaning by that? And again, there's other ways you can describe people, but that's one of them. That's common.
Yeah. So, and I think about, maybe I, right or wrong, will use that term kind of interchangeably with somebody who's lost, who doesn't have what I would consider a saving relationship with Jesus. Is that?
Yeah. And so how do you know that, though, I guess is the because like your friend, I could just see somebody going, well, he's Catholic, or he was almost confirmed Catholic, and there's not believer. What are you talking about? Maybe he's got some questions, but it doesn't sound like, I think a lot of people think non-believer is atheist.
Sure. Yeah. And let me clarify there. And that's a really good point. If there's some type of a spectrum out there, with atheists being on the far end, and I was going to make a joke about who would be like the ultra intense, super charismatic, I don't know, whatever this far end here. But I think on that spectrum, you have folks that are hostile towards God. And oftentimes those are atheists, although I've met some atheists who are some of the kindest people that you'd ever meet, that they don't have any hostility toward God. In fact, I've had an atheist say to me, I really wish I could believe what you believe. I would place my friend Peter as somebody who is agnostic. I think he has a genuine desire for there to be a God. His past experience, his current circumstance has him in a place where he's unsure. And so I would call that person a non-believer. In other instances, there are folks who I think certainly have some fundamental belief that there's a God behind all of this. But what my hope to help people come to realize is, well, there's not a God who's just behind all of this. There's a God who wrote himself into the story in the person of Jesus. And in fact, for you to have any real meaningful relationship with God, where he's not far apart in this life or the next, we've got to pay attention to the claims of Jesus that, hey, this is the way, the only way. And so when I use non-believer, I think of that as somebody who has not moved into a faith life or a relationship with God as it's prescribed in the Gospels.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, because in America here, a very high, overwhelming percentage of people believe in God.
God gets a lot of good press sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean somebody's connected to Jesus. In fact, oftentimes they're maybe not even related. So that's a great explanation. Thank you for that. Okay, so we're going to land the plane here.
Yeah.
Last question I like to ask on the podcast is, what's the one thing you want everybody to take away? Because we had a great little dissection of your conversation and your relationship there with your buddy. What's the one point, if somebody's leaving this podcast, you want them to remember this one thing?
Yeah, and that's an awesome question. The reason that I have a relationship with Peter, the reason that when I text him, he texts me back, and usually pretty quickly, and wants to get that next lunch or wants to text me randomly and run something. He's a texter. Is not because of the eloquence with which I've articulated the gospel to him. It's not because I don't buy lunch every time. His desire to spend time with me and lost folks' desire to spend time with believers hinges on how we invest relationally with lost people. Lost people need to know and experience the love of Jesus, and the way they most often will first is by somebody who follows Jesus, who loves them in spite of anything that the other folks may not love them for, and is willing to move towards them, to listen well, to consider what they've said, and just to flat out want to be with them is some of the greatest ministry that you can do.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That was fantastic. Thank you, Matt. And thank you for being my guest on the podcast.
Thank you, Blaine. Always a treat.
All right.
Thanks for listening to the Reach Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. That'd be a good idea. Share it with a friend and leave us a review to help others find the podcast. Now, for more resources, please visit reachothers.org and follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and we'd love to hear from you.